May every broken choice we make in desperation become a door toward healing. May love, even when disguised in shadows, reveal truth and not control. And may every woman walking through fire rise, not as a victim, but as the flame. The velvet rope didn't just divide space. It marked the line between desperation and decadence. On one side, billionaires with private islands, custom-tailored tuxedos, and champagne glasses refilled without a glance. On the other side, Soraya Blake, standing in borrowed heels that pinched her toes like guilt, trying not to look like she couldn't breathe. Her black satin gown shimmered under the chandelier's glow, not because it was expensive, but because she'd spent the last 2 nights sewing sequins onto the slit that hugged her thigh just enough to be noticed, not judged. She wasn't from this world. She'd never sipped champagne, never seen gold-dipped strawberries, never been in a ballroom where waiters wore gloves and masks were more than costumes. But here she was, holding onto the rope like it could anchor her trembling soul. "Girl," whispered her cousin Nia, nudging her from behind. "Stop standing like a deer. You look like you're going to pass out." Soraya didn't answer. Nia stepped closer, lips barely moving. "It's not real. Just breathe. Remember what I said. It's symbolic. You're not selling yourself. Just your time. 1 year. A few events. Some dinner photos." Soraya's jaw clenched. "You about that?" "Nope." Nia's grin was hollow. "But your mama's surgery won't pay for itself." That wasn't funny. Soraya's mama was back home in New Orleans, strapped to an oxygen machine in a failing hospital. The last surgery drained everything. The savings, the boutique, even her spirit. Soraya had maxed out every card, sold her car, and started stitching dresses on consignment just to keep the lights on. And still, it wasn't enough. So here she stood at the Crimson Gala, where 5 selected women were symbolically auctioned for fake marriages to the highest bidder, in exchange for a charitable donation toward their cause. Contracts, appearances, fluff. At least that's how the brochure described it. But the fear in her stomach didn't read brochures. The ballroom inside looked like something from a fantasy film. Marble floors, domed ceilings. Masked men with quiet confidence lounged at their exclusive tables, drinking crystal and watching everything. The MC, a tall man in a velvet tux, stepped onto the crimson-lit stage, and the room's chatter dimmed to murmurs. "Tonight," he announced, voice smooth and detached, 5 remarkable women stepped forward to reclaim their lives. 5 causes, 5 futures, 5 opportunities for you, our esteemed guests, to support, empower, and uplift through generosity. Soraya's fingers went cold. One by one, the women were called. One was a med student, raising money for her sister's education. Another was supporting a domestic shelter. Applause followed each bid. Nothing crude, no raised paddles, just nods, eye contact, assistance, gesturing discreetly. It was all so clean, so quiet, until it wasn't. The MC adjusted his cufflink. Bride number 4 has chosen to donate her earnings to her mother's emergency treatment fund in New Orleans. We'll begin the bidding at 200,000. Soraya's heart pounded so loud, she barely heard the first offers. 250, 300, 4. A pause. Then 700. Someone gasped. 1 million. Another voice called from the back. Soraya walked slowly, holding her chin up like she'd practiced, pretending she couldn't feel the stares beneath every mask. 2.5 came a crisp accent. Silence stretched. Then 3 million, said a voice that didn't match the room. Wasn't rich and pompous. It wasn't old or playful. It was low, focused, cold. The crowd went still. Soraya slowed her steps, gaze scanning the room. Toward the back, under a dimmed sconce, a tall man stood in black. No mask, no smile, hands calmly in his pockets. She didn't know his name, didn't recognize his face, but the stillness he carried, that was untakeable. The kind of stillness that didn't ask permission, the kind that owned the room, even in silence. 3 million. Going once. The MC blinked. Soraya's throat tightened. Going twice. She barely heard the gavel fall. Sold. Applause erupted, but all she could hear was the sound of her mother's wheezing breath on a phone call from last week. Soraya had just been sold to a stranger for $3 million. The scariest part? The way his eyes met hers across the ballroom, like he already knew her, like he'd been waiting for this moment, not to help, but to claim. Welcome to Fatal Embrace. If this gripped you already, please smash that like button. Comment below. What would you have done in Soraya's heels? And don't forget to subscribe. We have more twisted love stories coming. The velvet glamour of the ballroom faded fast. Soraya found herself in a side chamber, dimly lit by antique sconces and heavy velvet drapes. The air was colder, heavier. The noise from the gala was sealed off like she had crossed dimensions. From being displayed like a jewel on a stage to being packaged for transfer. A tall woman in a sharply tailored blazer stood behind a mahogany table. Clipboard in one hand, champagne in the other. Sid, please. We'll finalize the process. Soraya didn't move. This legal? The woman's eyes didn't twitch. Everything has been notarized. Your husband has already signed. You simply need to initial here. She tapped the corner of a black folder and sign here. Husband. That word should have made her laugh. Fry or run. Instead, she moved like she wasn't inside her own body. The chair creaked beneath her. Her fingers hovered over the pen. No one's forcing you, the woman added calmly, though it sounded more like protocol than concern. Soraya swallowed. I thought this was symbolic. It is. Legally symbolic. Socially beneficial. Economically generous. Her eyes flicked to the folder again. Do you want the $3 million transferred to your mother's account or yours? Soraya's breath caught. Mine, she whispered. I'll wire it to the hospital directly. The woman nodded. She flipped the folder open. There it was. The name already signed in clean. Even handwriting. Julian Vale. Soraya didn't recognize it. Didn't even know what part of the country that name belonged to. But somehow, seeing it on paper made her spine stiffen. She scrawled her signature. Initialed. Dated. The woman snapped the folder closed. Congratulations, Mrs. Vale. The door opened behind her, and he stepped in. Julian Vale didn't walk in. He arrived. 6 foot something, shoulders broad under the weight of a black suit tailored to precision. His skin was pale but clear, like untouched snow on cold stone. His eyes, pale blue, coal, so translucent they didn't seem real, like a storm trapped in crystal. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. He held out his hand. Soraya stood, not because she wanted to, but because every molecule in the room tilted in his direction. She took his hand on instinct. Firm, dry, unapologetically steady. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Vale, he said, voice smooth but controlled. She tried to answer, failed, then found her voice. Likewise. The woman with the clipboard gathered her things. Jet is prepped. Your transport is waiting. Soraya blinked. Jet? Julian turned toward the door. Come? He didn't wait for agreement. He just walked, and something in Soraya followed, even as her instincts screamed that this wasn't how a fairy tale began. This was something else entirely. The car that pulled up was long, black, and quiet inside. Not a word was spoken. Soraya watched the city lights blur through tinted glass as they made their way to a private airstrip where a sleek jet waited with engines already humming. Inside, it smelled of leather, wood polish, and something sharper. Power. The flight attendant smiled politely. Can I get you lemon water? Tea. Wine. Just water, Soraya said, dazed. She sat across from Julian, who was already focused on a folder in his lap. No label, just documents. She watched him. He didn't glance up. He didn't try to make conversation. He didn't ask if she okay. Eventually, she spoke. Why did you do it? He closed the folder, looked at her. Do what? Buy me. I didn't buy you, he said flatly. I made a contribution. You why mean? He paused. Because I believed in your cause. She leaned forward. The boutique? My mother? He didn't blink. No, then what? You. The word fell like a verdict. Julian leaned back, his voice level, quiet, and completely unreadable. I've known of you for some time. Soraya's stomach turned. What, me? He tilted his head, almost curious at her shock. I don't make large investments without research. Her voice dropped. You researched me? Yes. She sat back, breath catching. How thoroughly? Julian looked her directly in the eye. You were born July 9th. Your father left when you were 8. You interned at View Carré Design Studio at 17. You left Xavier University after your mother's second stroke. You eat cinnamon rolls when you're anxious and when you're overwhelmed. His voice softened. You sing. Soraya's world tilted. This wasn't a stranger. This was a man who had studied her life like a textbook. And she wasn't just his wife now. She was his acquisition. Snow greeted them before the silence did. The jet landed on a private runway, nestled between white-capped mountains. It was early spring, but in this corner of Montana, the cold still ruled. The ride from the airstrip to the estate took less than 15 minutes. The car wound through dense evergreens until it stopped at a long stone driveway, guarded by tall iron gates. As they opened, the full scale of Julian Vale's world revealed itself. The mansion wasn't a house. It was a fortress dressed in elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the frosty sky. The structure stood tall, sleek, designed with modern steel and ancient intimidation. Heated drive, polished stairs, and staff, 10 of them, at least, lined up silently at the front like they were about to greet royalty. They didn't smile. Not one. Soraya stepped out, coat snug around her shoulders. The cold bit at her cheeks. Welcome home, Mrs. Vale, someone said. It sounded forced, like didn't belong there, because she didn't. Julian handed her a slim keycard. Your suite is upstairs, left wing. If you need anything, speak to Claire. He didn't wait to show her around. He didn't offer her a tour. No mention of dinner, no welcome glass of champagne. He turned and walked away like the transaction had concluded, as if her presence was now background noise. She watched his back disappear down the right hallway, then looked down at the card in her hand. Sweet. Left wing. That's how this was going to be. Not a marriage, not even a contract, just a relocation. The room they gave her could have belonged to a queen. Cream-colored walls, velvet drapes, gold-accented lamps, a fireplace already flickering with warmth. The bed, massive, untouched, had pillows so plush she didn't dare sit down. But comfort didn't always feel safe. She walked to the dresser, opened a drawer looking for a charger, found something else. A photo of her smiling, holding a slice of red velvet cake. Her mama's second birthday after the stroke. She remembered the floral dress she'd sewn herself. That moment wasn't on social media. She was sure of it. She'd taken the picture on someone else's phone. Handshaking, she lifted a flash drive, hidden beneath the photo, and plugged it into the tablet on the desk. Folders, labeled by year, by location. Her heart thudded. She clicked one. Footage of her at the corner store, talking to Mr. Benoit. Another, her unlocking the boutique, turning the sign to closed. Those recent. Tonight, the Crimson Gala. A folder labeled Target acquired. Her blood turned to ice. She backed away. Behind her, the door creaked. Julian stepped in, expression calm, voice steady. I told them not to leave that there. Soraya's throat clenched. What is this? He didn't move closer. You were never part of the auction, he said. She blinked. What? You weren't chosen randomly. I made sure you were selected months ago. The gala was just a stage. A formality. She stared. Why? Julian's eyes met hers. Icy, cold. Because I was done watching. I wanted to own the ending. Soraya's heart dropped. Her entire body chilled. Not from the Montana air. From the realization she hadn't been saved. She'd been stalked, packaged, delivered. Soraya didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked backward slowly, her pulse slamming against her ribs like a warning bell. Julian didn't move. He simply closed the laptop she had left open, his pale eyes never leaving her face. You planned it, she said. I prepared for it. Same thing. Julian folded his arms, calm as the fireplace. Would you have agreed to meet with me any other way? Soraya's voice cracked. You watched me for years. Yes, you studied me. I learned from you. She shook her head like that could wipe away the fear. You manipulated my reality. No, he said, sharper now. I positioned myself for when you'd need help. That's not the same. Oh, really? Then explain the flash drive, the photos, the way I was handpicked before the gala even happened. He took a step closer. Soraya raised a hand like a barrier. Don't? He stopped and nodded. I understand, he said. She scoffed. You understand. I knew there'd be a wall between us. I built it. And now what? She hissed. You expect me to play house, to smile for photos and go to charity events while you sit behind security footage watching me sleep? Julian's eyes flickered, something between regret and restraint. No, he said. What then? I expect you to take control. That silenced her. What? He walked to the nearby desk and picked up a pen. You said you don't want to be watched, controlled, or cornered. I agree. You agree? I told you, he said plainly. You are not here as a prisoner. You are here under contract, which means I am legally bound to respect your conditions. Soraya crossed her arms, skeptical. So what? I just make a list, and you sign it. Yes, she studied him. You're bluffing. Julian set the pen down in front of her. Write it. It took her 3 hours. Claire brought her tea. No one interrupted. She sat in the same pristine lounge, wrapped in a robe, her curls now loose, determination tightening her shoulders like armor. She drafted her contract line by line. No surveillance of her suite, no physical contact. Unless she initiated it, unrestricted access to every part of the estate, the right to walk away after 1 year. No penalties, no interference, one favor. At any point. No questions. No refusal. She added a final clause in her own handwriting. My life. My terms. When she handed it to Julian later that evening, he didn't raise a single objection. He read it, folded the paper, signed, and handed it back. Soraya stared at him. You're really agreeing to this? I already agreed the moment you stepped into that ballroom. Why? He looked her in the eye, voice level. Because I want you to choose to stay. The contract sat between them on the low marble table. Signed, notarized, live. Soraya watched Julian as he calmly poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. Nah, wine. Not bourbon, just water. Like he was offering civility, not seduction. She didn't touch hers. You said I control the terms, she murmured. I meant it. Then don't stand behind me, she added. Don't linger. Don't hover. He sat down, instead, across from her, hands folded. What would you like me to do, Soraya? It was the first time he said her name like it belonged in his mouth. Not as an object, but as a presence. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mind was too loud. Her body too aware. He hadn't laid a finger on her, hadn't crossed a single line since signing the agreement. But the tension hadn't faded. If anything, it had changed shape. No longer cold and sharp, but warm, coiled, threatening to spark. That was worse, because it made her feel things she wasn't ready to admit. That night, a tray appeared outside her door. Red beans and rice, fried plantains, a single glass of sweet tea with lemon, the exact way her mother made it back home. No note, no name. She didn't touch it until midnight, and when she did, she ate it slowly, tears warming the corners of her eyes with each bite. Wasn't love, it wasn't kindness, but it was knowing. The next morning, she woke to music drifting through the halls. Smooth jazz. A Miles Davis melody that used to play on slow Sundays when her mama would hum while folding clothes. She followed it to the lounge. Live band, dimmed lights. Julian stood by the tall window, glass in hand, back turned. She watched him, her arms crossed, torn between fire and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He turned, slow and steady. "Because I want to know you. Not just the version I imagined. The real you. You can't undo what you did," she said. "I'm not trying to. I'm offering something better." She scoffed. "What's that? A prettier cage?" "No," he sipped. "Control." She frowned. "Oh, well, me. You don't have to love me," he said. "You don't have to pretend. But for 1 year, you control the story. Not me. Not this house. You." Soraya blinked. Julian took 2 slow steps toward her. "You decide what this marriage looks like, what we share, where we go. Who knows? And if I rewrite the rules again." He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out the same pen from the contract, held it toward her. "I'll sign it." She looked at it, then at him. Julian Vale, the man who had watched her life from afar like a private film, was now standing in front of her, not as an owner, but as a man willing to be rewritten, willing to give her the power he'd spent years pretending not to need. She didn't take the pen, not yet, but her fingers tingled, not from fear, but from possibility. He bought her for protection, but the price was his own heart. Soraya Blake didn't believe in fairy tales. She believed in survival. And survival lately looked like waking up to the wheeze of her mother's breathing machine, checking her phone for bounced payments, and reapplying mascara that had been used well past its shelf life. Her life had been stitched together like the dresses she made. Imperfect, patched, but still holding. In a small corner of New Orleans, she managed the boutique her mama started before the strokes stole her voice. What once bustled with local customers, hand-measured gowns, and Saturday tea fittings had become a quiet shell. The boutique now doubled as storage for overdue bills and unpaid receipts. Her mother, Rosalind Blake, had been a firebrand, stylish, graceful, feared in a boardroom, and beloved in her community. But all it took was one medical emergency, and everything they'd built fell like dominoes. Insurance denied. Government help delayed. Debt collectors more consistent than old friends. Soraya tried everything. Freelance sewing, delivery apps, even offering online classes on textile basics. Nothing made a dent. The latest diagnosis meant a new surgery, a rare one, experimental and expensive. The clock was ticking. What about modeling again? Nia had offered one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow as they folded returns at the boutique. "I'm not 21 anymore," Soraya replied. "You're 26 and fine," Nia said. "Desperate times, cousin. I heard something. Something big. Not sleazy. More strategic." Soraya raised an eyebrow. Strategic sounds like code for sketchy. But the next day, she found herself reading an anonymous invite Nia slipped into her bag. The Crimson Gala. 1 night. 5 women. Symbolic marriages to the world's elite in exchange for 7-figure charitable contributions. No strings. No commitment. Just a contract. 1 year. One cause. One chance. It was ridiculous. It sounded like a stunt. But as she sat beside her mother later that evening, gently wiping her chin, adjusting the breathing tube, she couldn't deny what clenched in her chest. She needed help, and there was none left to ask for. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. Nia did her makeup, subtle gold shimmer on her lids, a deep, nude lipstick with hints of plum. They borrowed a gown from a former boutique client, black satin with a high slit and gold thread embroidered near the waist. Soraya's own touch was in her hair. She twisted and pinned it into a halo, adding delicate gold clips shaped like tiny leaves. A quiet crown. The venue was the Essex Estate in Manhattan. Even the air smelled expensive. Soraya was one of 5 women selected, chosen after a mysterious panel vetted causes and confirmed documentation. There were no photos, no real names listed publicly, just coded profiles for the men to browse. She was bride 4th. The waiting room was tense. One woman was pacing. Another was meditating. Soraya sat still, focused. This wasn't romance. It wasn't flirtation. It was survival in a high-cut slit and heels half a size too tight. The coordinator entered. "You're on next." Her stomach flipped. Nia squeezed her hand and whispered, "Walk like you're not for sale. Walk like you're taking what's yours." She walked onto a crimson-lit runway where chandeliers glittered and rich men watched behind masks. But no one in that room frightened her more than the thought of losing her mother. Bride number 4 has chosen to allocate her donation toward her mother's life-saving treatment in New Orleans. The MC's voice rippled across the marble floor. "We begin at 200,000. A soft murmur spread through the masked crowd. Some heads turned. Some assistants signaled with the faintest gestures. 250, 300, 450. Soraya kept walking, posture tall, arms poised at her side. Every step was a choice not to shake, not to shrink. 1 million, came a voice, older, amused. Someone at table 5 nodded. A steward recorded it. 2.5, countered another. Then the voice that shifted everything spoke. 3 million wasn't a out. Didn't ride on go. It was measured, intentional, certain. The MC hesitated. Even he didn't expect that jump. Soraya's steps faltered, just briefly, but she didn't look up. She kept walking as the room quieted. 3 million going once, a hush going twice. No counter, no challenge. She turned just enough to catch the source of the voice. A man standing in the shadows, near the back. No mask, no fanfare, just stillness, like he was never waiting to bid, only to end the game. Sold. The gavel tapped gently. Soraya blinked. Applause began, but all she heard was her heartbeat. She was escorted off stage and into a quiet corridor. A contract was already waiting. Slim, black folder, gold seal. She was told to sign beside the name, already written. Julian Vale. She didn't know him, had never seen his face before tonight. But there was thing about the way the coordinator didn't question the bid, didn't need approval, just moved through the motions like this had been arranged all along. "Do you have any objections?" the woman asked professionally. "No," Soraya said. "Just questions. Those come later," she said gently. "Tonight, you've been secured." It wasn't meant cruelly, but the word lingered like chains. She signed. The door opened. He entered. Julian Vale was not what she expected. No wedding ring, no bow tie, just a man carved from sharp lines and silence. His gaze landed on her with clinical focus. Not lust, not glee, like he was confirming a delivery. "Nice to meet you," he said. She nodded, cautious. "Likewise, we leave now." He turned. The jet was ready, and Soraya didn't ask where they were going, because what terrified her more than the destination was the possibility that he already knew every step she'd take. The jet was sleek, silver-toned, and whisper-quiet on the inside. Soraya sat across from Julian, legs crossed tightly, hands folded in her lap. She tried not to nair. He wasn't looking at her. Not yet. He read from a folder with no title. She wondered if it was about her. "You don't talk much," she finally said. He looked up. "I talk when it matters." She leaned back. "I just signed a contract to become your wife. Doesn't that qualify?" His gaze didn't flinch. "Does." A pause. He closed the folder and rested it on the table between them. "I've followed your story for longer than you think." She blinked. "Excuse me? I researched you extensively." Her throat tightened. "Why?" "Because I don't waste $3 million on strangers. People donate all the time. I don't donate. I invest." His words weren't cruel. They were final, and they landed like ice water across her skin. He leaned forward. "I know your mother's diagnosis. I know the boutique's debt. I know you sold your car 2 months ago and skipped meals to pay insurance premiums. I know you're stubborn and loyal. Far too proud." Her stomach churned. "How do you know all that?" "I watch." "Why?" He didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "Because I've been waiting to intervene without damaging your pride." She shook her head. "You think this is noble?" "No," he said. "It's necessary." He looked out the window. Needed a way out. "I offered one." Soraya stared at the man across from her. Everything about him was too controlled, too composed. This wasn't love. This wasn't kindness. This was a man who had written the ending of her story before she even knew there was a plot. The jet landed hours later on a runway she didn't recognize. Montana. Julian didn't say it. He didn't have to. Snow blanketed the landscape. A black SUV waited at the edge of the tarmac. As they drove up the steep incline, a mansion appeared. Modern glass, stone walls, endless silence. She stepped out. The wind burned her cheeks. The staff greeted them wordlessly. She was escorted inside. A fireplace glowed. Julian turned to her before heading down the hall. "Your suite is in the left wing. Claire will assist." And just like that, he disappeared into the shadows of his own home. No welcome kiss, no warmth, just a man who had pulled every string, now waiting to see if the puppet would dance. The drive up to the estate was unnervingly quiet. Montana's late snow covered everything in a layer of white, clean, untouched, and cold. The SUV's tires crunched softly as it climbed the steep road flanked by pine and steel fences. Soraya sat pressed against the door, arms folded tightly, her body stiff with disbelief. The man seated beside her wasn't speaking, just staring straight ahead. Julian Vale, her legal husband, silent still. Not once had he asked if she was warm enough. Not once had he turned to see if she was overwhelmed. His presence was absolute, but his attention felt optional, like she was beside a king, not a man. As the vehicle turned the final bend, the mansion appeared. Carved into the cliffside, it looked like something from a billionaire's fever dream. Sleek glass panels, mixed with stone, steel beams running across the exterior, like they were holding the mountain together. Star, strong, isolated. The front gate opened without a word. Sensors, maybe. Cameras, definitely. Soraya glanced at Julian. He remained unreadable. When they stopped, a line of staff waited at the foot of the entrance stairs. Not a one cracked a smile. Men in sharp suits, women in crisp uniforms. Everyone looked prepared, rehearsed. Cold, she stepped out into the frigid air. No one said welcome. No one offered a coat. Mrs. Vale, a woman with a high bun, said, giving the slightest nod. "We've prepared your wing." "Your wing?" Julian turned to her, brief and blunt. "Left wing? Claire will assist you." "That's it?" Soraya asked. He didn't even pause. You'll find everything you need. If not, ask Claire. He walked off without another word. No explanations. No guidance. No connection. Just distance. And as the thick doors closed behind her, Soraya realized something. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. And she had just been escorted into a kingdom where she wasn't queen. Just a possession, moved into place. Claire was efficient. She led Soraya through the massive halls with ease, explaining doors, schedules, services, all in a clipped tone that left no room for warmth. The left wing was hers, apparently. Private suite, heated floors, a bedroom, larger than the entire boutique she left behind in New Orleans. Plush cream sofas, velvet curtains, gold-rimmed mirrors, a marble soaking tub, and a fireplace already glowing softly. This key card gives you access to your floor, Claire said. Other wings are secured per Mr. Vale's orders. You'll find an intercom on the nightstand and pantry. Staff won't enter without invitation. Soraya tried to catch her eyes. And if I need to see him? Claire's lips barely moved. He'll come to you, right? Claire gave a small bow and walked away. Soraya stood still, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. Black dress, wrinkled coat, wind-tossed curls. She looked like someone who had won a prize, but she felt like a stranger in her own skin. She explored slowly, careful not to touch too much. There were bookshelves filled with hardcover volumes, many first editions. The art was abstract and oddly curated. A sculpture in the corner looked like it cost more than her mother's entire treatment plan. She walked to the window and looked out. Snowflakes floated past the tall glass, catching the golden glow of the fireplace behind her. Far in the distance, she saw the edge of a private lake. A dock, a boathouse, the kind of setting reserved for magazines or movie sets. But in that moment, it felt more like a stage, a place designed for viewing, for power, for watching, not for living. Soraya kicked off her heels and curled into the oversized chair near the window. She didn't know how long she sat there. Our worst. Darkness deepened. Dinner was delivered without a word, but the silence was loud. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no music in the air, no trace of the man who had brought her here. It was only the house, watching her, holding her, and waiting. It started with a drawer. She had gone looking for a phone charger. The top drawer in the dressing room was neatly organized. Hair accessories, silk eye masks, organic lip balm, and stationery with gold-trimmed edges. The second drawer held something different. A photo. Her, posed, not filtered, but real. She was smiling, holding a slice of red velvet cake, wearing a dress she'd sewn herself for her mother's birthday last year. That photo had never been posted online. She held her breath as she picked it up. Beneath it was a slim flash drive tucked in a linen pouch. Her fingers trembled. She crossed the room and plugged it into the mounted tablet on the desk. Folders, labeled by year, by location. Her breath caught. She clicked one. French Market 2021. Footage of her laughing with the vendor who sold beignets every Friday. Another boutique front 2022. She was closing up, her back to the camera, keys jingling. Her heart pounded. Then auction night. Video from the Crimson Gala, recorded from a different angle. Zoomed, tracked. She scrolled further down. A folder titled Target Acquired. Her fingers froze. She backed away from the screen, and that's when she heard it. The soft creak of her door. Julian stood there, not surprised, not apologetic, just watching. I told them not to leave that there, he said. Soraya's voice was barely a whisper. What is this? Julian stepped into the room. Slow, calm, documentation. She stared at him, the tablet still glowing behind her. You documented my life. I observed. You watched me. Without my knowledge. I needed to know if I was right. About what? That you were the one. She moved around the chair, keeping a physical barrier between them. Do you hear yourself? He nodded. I do, and I won't insult you by pretending it doesn't sound unsettling. Unsettling, she hissed. You've been tracking me for years. I didn't interfere, he said firmly. Not once, but you waited. You watched me hit bottom. And then you offered a rope wrapped in a contract I didn't understand. Julian walked to the desk and closed the tablet. I researched. I verified. I protected. From what? She spat. From worse, he replied. You have no idea how many people bid that night, or why they were there. She stared at him. So you were the lesser evil. He didn't blink. I was the solution. She laughed bitterly. A solution doesn't spy on someone's life for years and call it care. Julian tilted his head. Would you rather I walked up to your shop one day and said, hello, I'd like to fix everything for you. No string attached? Soraya's lips pressed into a line. Would you have believed me? He asked. Silence. He nodded slowly. That's what I thought. She turned away, heart beating like a war drum. You should have left me alone. He didn't reply. He just said, I couldn't. And the way he said it made her stomach twist, because it didn't sound like obsession. It sounded like regret. Soraya couldn't sleep. She paced the suite like a caged animal. Every room too soft, too silent, too watched. In the morning, breakfast was served on a silver tray. She didn't touch it. By noon, she left her wing. No one stopped her. She explored deeper into the estate. A quiet reading lounge, a music room with an untouched grand piano, a hallway with portraits. None of him. Only landscapes, cities, places he'd been. But behind one cracked door, she found something else. Photos of her, framed, subtle, tucked into the corners of travel shots and architectural studies. A hand, a reflection in a shop window, the hem of her dress in a wide-angle street shot. She stepped back. Her skin crawled. This is sick, she whispered. Julian's voice came from behind. You weren't meant to be in that auction. She turned sharply. He leaned against the doorframe. You were never supposed to be chosen randomly. Excuse me? He walked in. I made sure you were selected. The auction was theater. She stared, trembling. Why? Because I had waited long enough. She shook her head. That's not love. I didn't say it was. Then what is it? Julian's eyes met hers. It's decision. I made one. I chose you. And now you choose what happens next. She swallowed. So this isn't about control. No, then what is it about? Redemption, he said. For you, for both of us. The snow fell heavier that night. Soraya stood in front of the unlit fireplace in her suite, arms wrapped around her midsection. Her body was warm, but her mind felt like it was locked in ice. Images from the surveillance footage replayed in her head on a loop, her laughing, walking, shopping, singing to herself, without realizing someone was watching. It wasn't just unsettling, it was personal. She hadn't touched dinner. The tray sat on a silver cart by the wall, steaming gumbo, cornbread, fresh tea. Someone had tried again to recreate comfort, but no food could ease the sickness in her stomach. The door knocked once, firm, measured. She didn't answer. It opened anyway. Julian stepped in. No jacket, no staff, just him. He closed the door behind him, slow and silent. You shouldn't come in without permission, she said without turning. He stopped several feet away. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't offer it. No. Silence. Then there was another man that night, he said quietly. Soraya slowly turned her head. Julian continued. The gala I didn't ask. You need to know. Her voice tightened. Why? Because I'm not the only one who watched you. She narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? There was a bidder, he said. Someone with a darker purpose. Soraya crossed her arms. They all had money, influence, control. What makes this one different? Julian's eyes didn't waver. He doesn't wait for consent. The words dropped heavy between them. He doesn't buy time. He buys obedience. She blinked. He targeted women with no options. Julian continued. No family. No legal protections. Most of them disappear within months. No weddings. No contracts. No charities involved. Is that what I was to you? She snapped. A vulnerable woman who wouldn't be missed. No, he said, without hesitation. You were the first one I wanted to save from being seen that way. She stared at him, jaw tight. You think that makes you a hero? No, he said again, but I kept you from becoming his next asset. Soraya's voice cracked. You could have warned me, told me the truth. You wouldn't have believed me. You never gave me the chance. Julian nodded. That's fair. He stepped back toward the door. I'm not asking for trust. But the threat is real. You were watched by more than me, Soraya. I just moved first. She said nothing. But something inside her shifted. Not in forgiveness, but in awareness. There was something worse than obsession. And she might have escaped it. By inches. Soraya couldn't sleep. Again, the mansion was too quiet. Even the snow outside felt like it muffled her thoughts. The silence left too much room for remembering how calm Julian had been when he spoke about the man who might have bought her instead. How easily he owned the word intervene. She needed to move, to walk, to see. She slipped out of her suite and walked barefoot down the west hall. The cold marble numbed her anxiety. One hallway led to a study. Another led to a music room. But a sharp click drew her attention. A shift in the wall panel. Accidental? Maybe. She had leaned slightly against the frame near the library. The wall shifted, revealing a door. Her breath hitched. The door was plain. Heavy, wood grain, slightly worn. She pressed a trembling hand against it and pushed. It creaked open. The room inside was dark, save for a faint sensor light in the ceiling. Storage, shelves, boxes, neatly stacked, labeled in clean, minimal handwriting. Each label bore initials. A Burgess, 2016 E. Fairfax, 2018 R. Lamar, 2019. No first names, just initials and years. Her eyes scanned the rows. All women, all from different years. She walked slowly, heart pounding. At the far end, one box sat slightly separate from the others. No label, no name. She reached for it with trembling fingers. Inside were receipts, photos, small tokens, broken necklace, torn glove, a swatch of fabric she recognized from her favorite coat, a photo from the back of her boutique, taken in spring. She was holding a bag of pastries, laughing with her friend. None of these things had ever been published online. None had been shared with Julian. They were hers, stolen snapshots of her life, her identity cataloged like evidence. Her chest tightened. She staggered backward, breath shallow. How long had he been collecting these? How deep had the obsession gone? Claire wasn't supposed to leave that door unsealed. His voice struck her spine. She turned. Julian stood in the doorway, not startled, not ashamed, just aware. You did this, she said, voice raw. You filed women. I recorded moments. Don't twist it. He stepped inside. Those are reminders. Snapshots of lives I've preserved. She glared. You make yourself sound like a saint. I'm not. Then what are you, Julian? she asked, tears brimming. What is this? Some shrine? A trophy case? No, he said, softer now. It's a record of what I protected. Her chest heaved. You didn't protect me. You collected me. That's not true. You think it's better because you kept quiet? Because you waited until I was desperate to step in? Julian stood still, eyes heavy. I didn't interfere with your life, he said, but I did observe. And I made a choice to act before someone dangerous did. You don't get credit for choosing to control me in a cleaner way. I never wanted to control you. Then why hide all this? He paused, then said it gently, because it's hard to explain protection when it looks like obsession. Soraya didn't run. She didn't pack her bags or storm the halls. She sat down and wrote on the same table where Julian had offered the original contract. She crafted a new one. Different ink, different rules. Her hands trembled, but her spine stayed straight. The fire crackled nearby as the snowstorm raged outside. By morning, the document was done. Julian entered without being summoned. She didn't look at him. Sit, she said. He obeyed. She handed him the papers. Read it. He did, carefully, line by line. No cameras or recordings in any private space she used. No physical contact of any kind, unless she initiated it. Full access to the estate, and any wing she desired. Absolute autonomy over her daily schedule, appearance, and public engagement. A one-time favor, to be redeemed at her choosing. No conditions, no delay, no refusal. Julian reached the final clause, handwritten at the bottom. If I ask you to disappear, you do. He looked up. Soraya's face didn't waver. Sign it? Julian picked up the pen. Signed? No edits, no hesitations. He slid the paper back to her. This is yours now. She nodded once. I am not, she added. He looked at her, understanding. No, he said. Your nod. That night, she lit the fireplace in her suite, burned the original contract, watched the gold-embossed paper turn to ash. Julian never came near, and for the first time, Soraya slept without wondering what he wanted. Because now he would only get what she allowed. Power didn't arrive with a crown. It arrived with silence and freedom. The day after Julian signed her contract, Soraya didn't wait for anyone's instruction. She got up before sunrise, slipped on her robe, and left her suite like she belonged to the stone and steel halls she now lived in. No one stopped her. Claire greeted her with a neutral smile. Breakfast will be ready in conservatory. Soraya paused. Who usually eats there? Mr. Vale. Alone. Tell the kitchen to bring mine there too, she said. And fresh fruit. No eggs. Claire nodded. And for the first time, something flickered in the woman's expression. Respect. The conservatory was glass-walled, warm with morning light and misted plants. A soft jazz record played from somewhere. When Julian entered, dressed in his usual monochrome calm, Soraya was already seated, slicing a pear with deliberate ease. He paused, then walked toward the far end of the table. They sat 10 feet apart. No words, only tension and silverware. When Claire poured his coffee, Soraya looked up. I'll take mine black, she said. Extra cinnamon. Julian glanced over, but said nothing. Over the next week, she explored every inch of the estate. No room was off limits now. Not by law, not by behavior. She found his wine cellar, tasted nothing. She walked the gallery of foreign artifacts, asked no questions. She visited the garden, once owned by Julian's late grandmother, trimmed a rosebush, and instructed the groundskeeper to plant lilies. She claimed the art studio, the library, the sun room. The property wasn't just a mansion anymore. It was a canvas, and she was painting over his silence. She changed the schedule of staff. rearranged the menu, moved her suite to the corner room with a better view of the frozen lake. She opened the doors to the community lounge and turned it into a design space. Sketchbooks, swatches, mannequins. Julian watched from a distance, said nothing, resisted nothing, but his eyes, they followed her like a second shadow. Each evening, she returned to her space, closed the doors, and drafted plans, not just for the house, but for her life. She applied to reopen the boutique in New Orleans, remotely for now, sent updated paperwork to the hospital, donated anonymously to 2 medical centers, all with money from the contract, money that now worked for her name, her cause, her future, not his. Power didn't come in loud declarations. It came in small, constant steps, and Soraya walked every single one until the halls that once imprisoned her became her own. Julian Vale did not disappear, but he also did not approach. He remained at a distance, so disciplined, it almost felt artificial, like he had rehearsed every step in silence. Soraya would catch glimpses of him in the reading lounge, buried in a leather chair with his head down in the courtyard, watching snowfall collect on the stone railings. He never entered a room without a pause, never lingered near her door, never once broke the rules she'd written for him. And yet, he was present. He knew when she needed a sewing tool replaced, knew when her old coat, the one she'd stitched by hand years ago, had torn. She found a replacement one morning, same cut, same color, folded on her chair. No note, just knowledge. She didn't thank him. She didn't scold him. She wore it anyway. In the kitchen, he made coffee before she arrived. In the gallery, he left the lights on when she passed. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer insights. But when she walked into a room, he noticed, always, like a quiet rhythm she couldn't shake. One afternoon, she entered the wine room, trying to remember the taste of something expensive. Julian was already there. She froze. He looked up. "Would you like the space?" "I don't mind sharing it," she said. He nodded. They stood apart for several minutes, in silence. 2 bottles. 1 room. Years of distance, packed into 5 feet of air. "I used to hate red wine," she said. "Why?" "It reminded me of burnt medicine." He glanced over. "And now?" "I don't drink it." He nodded once. She turned to go, then paused. "Why do you stay away?" Julian's jaw flexed. "Because I'm trying to do it right." Didn't answer. But that night, she left her door slightly ajar, and he still didn't enter. It began with the music. One night, as snow blanketed the windows, jazz poured from the old record player in the lounge. Miles Davis again, her mother's favorite. Soraya sat in the corner, curled up in her oversized sweater, sipping tea with lemon. Julian entered quietly. He stood by the window, back to her, glass of wine in hand. She didn't speak, neither did he, but the music, it filled everything. The silence between them felt thick, like silk that had been stretched too tight. He turned slowly and looked up, their eyes locked, one heartbeat too long. She felt it. Then the shift, the pull, that ache in her chest she didn't want to name. He didn't move, but he didn't look away. She stood, setting the mug down gently, walked toward the window. The tension was not cold now. It was heat waiting to ignite. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked softly. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "No," she blinked. "I wanted to help you." She tilted her head, "even if it meant losing me." He answered without hesitation. "Eventually, then." Silence again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed. "I hate that you know what I like," she whispered. "I hate that you had to find out how I learned." She stepped closer. "So why didn't you run?" when I made it clear I hated you?" His answer was soft. "Because you didn't mean it." Her throat tightened. "And if I did?" He met her eyes. "I'd let you go." The tension snapped, but neither of them moved. They just stood there, caught in something too deep to be fear and too raw to be desire. Not yet, but close. So close. The sun barely broke over the Montana ridge when Soraya's curiosity finally outweighed her resolve. She couldn't sleep, not when every corner of the estate now felt like it waited on her next command. It wasn't power that haunted her. It was proximity, the unspoken weight of Julian's presence around her, like the walls themselves, remembered him. She headed down the West Wing corridor, one she hadn't fully explored. Claire had once said the gym was state-of-the-art, but Soraya hadn't dared enter before. Until now. She pushed open the heavy glass doors. The air inside was warm, scented with cedar, a hint of fresh linen, and something unmistakably masculine. A wall of mirrors lined the far end, polished floors, rowing machines, boxing bags, a full private weight bench set up, and in the center, Julian Vale. He didn't notice her, at first, or maybe he did, but pretended not to. He was shirtless, sweat gleaming along his shoulders, striking the heavy bag with fierce control. Soraya stood frozen in the doorway. She knew he was fit. She'd seen him in tailored suits, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal veined forearms, tension coiled beneath fabric. But this was raw, controlled violence, discipline turned physical, muscles flexed with every strike, deltoids taut, back smooth and sculpted, core locked in every movement. No wasted effort, no showmanship, just power, grounded in restraint. She took a breath and stepped inside. Julian caught her reflection in the mirror, but didn't turn. "You're allowed in here," he said. She raised a brow. "Didn't say I wasn't." Another punch. The bag jolted. She crossed the room slowly, arms folded. "Didn't think billionaires needed to hit things." "Even billionaires bleed," he replied, voice flat. He struck again, fist connecting with a thud that echoed. "You're angry," she observed. "Not at you. Didn't say you were." He turned then, and the sight hit her harder than the bag he'd been pummeling. His chest rose and fell in slow, calculated breaths. Pale skin dusted with sweat. His eyes didn't wander over her robe or her bare ankles. He didn't leer, but he didn't look away either. "You think I'm dangerous," he said. "No, you are." Julian reached for a towel, wiping his hands before he approached. He didn't close the distance all the way, just stepped close enough that the air between them felt different, denser. "You came here for a reason," he said quietly. "Curiosity about me, about what kind of man works out, like he's trying to outrun his own shadow." Julian studied her, then stepped back. "Careful, Soraya. Some shadows don't want to be outrun." She turned to leave, but not before pausing at the door. "Next time you're throwing punches, let me know," she said over her shoulder. "I'd like to see what it looks like when you lose control." He didn't answer, but when she glanced back, he was watching her, and he didn't blink. The next morning, she found him in the library. He sat on a leather sofa, open journal on his lap. Not typing, not scrolling, just writing by hand, pen gliding across thick paper. Soraya hesitated at the threshold. She hadn't expected him there. He looked up. "Didn't think you'd be in here," she said. "It's quiet. You have a whole estate. I prefer this room." She walked to the edge of the table. "You follow me in the gym," he said. "But the library surprises you." "I wasn't following you." "You never are." Her eyes narrowed. There it was, that edge, that tension. "Why do you provoke me?" she asked. Julian closed the journal. "Because you're honest when you're mad." So now we're playing emotional Jenga. No, I'm trying to understand you by pushing my buttons. By seeing if you'll push back, she stepped closer. You really think you've earned that, right? Julian stood, not aggressively, just to meet her. I don't believe I've earned anything from you, he said, but I know you're used to silence, politeness, people letting you shrink into corners. I won't. Soraya's jaw tightened. And why not? Because you were never meant to be small. The words punched her harder than his fists ever could. Her voice dropped. Don't use poetry to cover control. I'm not controlling you, he said. I'm responding to what you pretend not to want. That tore it. She stepped forward, inches from him now. You don't know what I want. Julian's breath shifted. I know what you fear, he said. Oh, being seen, being chosen without being chased, being wanted for more than what you give. Her hand clenched at her side. His gaze dropped once, briefly, to her mouth. A charged silence thickened. She didn't move, neither did he. The tension sat between them, like heat before thunder. Then she exhaled, sharp, controlled, and stepped back. I don't need you to decode me. Julian didn't chase. I know, he said, but I still want to understand. She left the room without another word, but every part of her burned, because part of her wanted him to follow, and part of her was afraid of what would happen. If he did, that night, she walked the halls, lone, thinking, still vibrating from the earlier encounter. The fire he ignited in her wasn't just anger or attraction. It was recognition, a closeness that terrified her, because it felt too real. She wandered toward the eastern wing, where the study stood, the one she hadn't entered since discovering the surveillance photos. To her surprise, the door was ajar. She heard movement inside. Voices, not live ones. A video, a grainy recording played on the screen. Julian in a room with two other men, speaking a language she didn't recognize. The body language was tense. One man slammed a briefcase on the table. Julian stood still, but something in his posture was different. Not passive. She stepped inside. Julian didn't flinch when he noticed her. He paused the video. Their eyes met. You weren't posed to see that, he said. I wasn't supposed to a lot of things. He gave a faint nod. Fair. She pointed at the screen. What was that? A memory I don't revisit often. Friends? No enemies? Dead? Her stomach turned. You were in something, weren't you? He walked to the window. For a long time, he said, the kind of work that requires silence, precision, and the willingness to do ugly things for the right reasons. You mean violence. He didn't deny it. I've put men in the ground, Soraya. Not for sport, not for pleasure, but because the world doesn't always give you clean choices. She dared. That's who you are. That's who I was. Now, Julian turned to her. Now, I just want to protect something good before it gets swallowed. Her throat tightened. You mean me? I mean us, if you ever allow it. The fire crackled behind them, and Soraya didn't say anything, but she stayed longer than she should have, because sometimes the scariest thing is realizing the devil who walked through fire wants to stand beside you in the light. It started with a strange hum, not from the hallway lights, not from the silent heating vents, tucked neatly into the estate's ornate walls. This was deeper, low, like a breath held just under the surface of still water. Soraya had grown used to the estate's luxury, the automatic blinds that whispered open with the sunrise, the tailored uniforms worn by the discreet staff, the thick hush of wealth that seemed to press in on every square foot. But what she wasn't used to was the weight of secrets, and Julian's estate had them buried beneath more than just marble and crystal. She had spent the past 2 mornings combing through hallways, in the door, west wing, the only part of the house she hadn't truly explored. Her footsteps echoed as she passed heavy paintings of men in military uniforms and women in pearl collars who stared down at her with judgmental eyes. But one wall at the end of a corridor drew her in, not for what was there, but for what wasn't. A faint draft, a subtle shift in light, a wooden panel that clicked when she leaned against it to tighten her shoelace. Soraya leaned back and knocked her knuckle on it. "Hollow," she pressed. A sudden soft hiss escaped as the panel cracked inward. Her heart stuttered. Behind it wasn't another hallway or some grand office. It was a narrow, descending staircase made of worn wood, unpolished, unlike the rest of the estate. She hesitated only a second. Then she stepped in. The stairs creaked beneath her weight, and with every step downward, the chill grew deeper. Her hands skimmed the cold walls for balance. There were no light switches, just a dim trail of soft bulbs embedded into the stone on each side. She followed them like a trail. Out bottom, a single door waited. It wasn't locked. She opened it. The room was colder than the hallway, almost sterile in its organization. But something about it screamed invasion. Not hers, but of privacy, violated in quiet, calculating ways. The air held that unnatural scent of metal filing cabinets, dried paper, and time. Rows and rows of shelves, stretched from floor to ceiling. On each shelf, identical white boxes, labels printed in sharp black ink. She stepped forward, slowly. Fairfax, June 2018. M. Winslow, December 2017. A Bennett, February 2019. K. Holland, August 2015. Soraya, September 2024. Her breath caught so violently, she had to grip the edge of the nearest shelf. Her name, in all capitals, neatly typed. She blinked hard, didn't change. It wasn't a coincidence. Wasn't a shared surname. It was her. The date. It matched the gala. The night, everything had changed. She pulled the box out with trembling hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it carried the weight of the last 3 weeks and everything she didn't want to believe. Inside, she found photographs, dozens of them. Surveillance shots of her at the hospital. Her sitting on the bench by the pen emergency room. Her crying in Nia's arms the night before the auction. There was a report detailing her financial status, her mother's condition, even a printout of the eviction notice that had been taped to their apartment door. There was a folded page containing her blood type, medical history. There was even a screenshot of her last messages to Nia. She slammed the lid shut. No, this was not what she had signed up for. She had offered herself for a bid to save her mother, not to be studied like prey. She turned quickly to leave, but something else stopped her. Her box wasn't the only one. There were over 24 others. Names she didn't know. Dates that ranged years back. Women. All women. She stared back at the Soraya box and whispered through clenched teeth, "What is this, Julian?" But in that moment, she already knew. This wasn't a coincidence. She had never stumbled into the auction by chance. She hadn't been the lucky girl, rescued by the richest bidder. She had been targeted. And this whole room, was proof. She didn't remember climbing back up the stairs. Her hands were cold, her jaw clenched. Her breath came in hard and fast as she stormed through the West Wing, no longer wondering if she should explore more. She needed answers. Her name, her life, boxed up and categorized like a dossier. There were too many questions now, and all of them pointed to Julian. No more silence. No more waiting for explanations. And if he had an answer, she'd hear it face to face. The silence in the archive room wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Soraya stood there, her arms rigid at her sides, as the faint scent of varnished wood clung to the stale air. The boxes weren't stacked randomly. They were shelved methodically, each one marked with a red seal, some labeled with numbers, others with initials, all in the same handwriting. Male, sharp strokes, efficient. Her fingers grazed one box labeled E. Fairfax. Not a number, a name, or at least the remains of one. A woman? She squatted and slid the box halfway off the shelf. It was heavier than it looked. The seal cracked open with a soft pop, and inside was a collection of photographs, paper clippings, notes, and surveillance shots. All of a woman who looked effortlessly poised, maybe in her late 20s. Light eyes, prominent cheekbones, candid shots from airports, from the steps of buildings, even from inside what looked like a therapy office. Soraya's chest tightened. Some photos had dates, months leading up to the gala auction. The most recent marked just weeks before Julian bought her. She pulled out a folded manila folder labeled Psych Eval F021. She hesitated, her gut coiled like a warning siren in her ribs. Still, she opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a woman with deeply auburn hair, sitting on a stone ledge overlooking a lake. The back was marked E. Fairfax, subject third, unreturned. Returned? Soraya's throat dried. Beneath the photo, the folder held a single sheet, a psychological profile. She skimmed through the lines. Subject, E. Fairfax disposition, resistant, highly intelligent, last sighted, upstate NY retreat, 17 months ago. Status, missing. No formal report. No inquiry filed. Her heart plummeted. Who were these women? Where were they now? She stepped back and turned her head toward the hallway, half expecting someone to be watching. But all she could hear was the soft hum of the estate's heating system. The words blurred for a moment as her brain scrambled for stability. It wasn't just a woman. It was a file, like hers, like someone had built a profile, documented reactions, emotional triggers, preferences, favorite drinks, stress habits, charitable tendencies. Soraya felt heat rising in her ears. There were more boxes on that same row, another labeled with RM, another with C. Davis. Some had partial first names and matching surveillance pictures tucked into clear files. No one was smiling in the photos. They looked like they were being watched, not remembered. She stood, slowly, as her mind processed what she was seeing. Julian had told her she was never supposed to be in the auction. But these weren't just backup files. These were women who had all been studied, watched, and possibly groomed. More boxes lined the shelving. Names she didn't recognize. Some had numbers instead of names. Some were marked with dates. Others labeled auction interest, inactive. Every single one was cataloged like property. And somehow, she was one of them now. Why would you keep these? She muttered aloud, barely recognizing her own voice. Soraya felt the burn of betrayal boil up again. She wasn't the first, and she might not be the last. Her mind reeled. Was Julian behind this? Then she paused. Something about the way his voice trembled the night before. The way his eyes softened when she said she hated being watched. It didn't match this. This was clinical, mechanical, heartless. Julian may have paid $3 million for her. But this looked like a system. Machine. A racket. As she slid the Fairfax file back into its box, she noticed a hidden compartment at the bottom. Curiosity overpowered her nausea. She pried it open and found a phone. Dead battery. Still, it could mean someone tried to escape. Someone tried to leave aim. She grabbed it and the E. Fairfax folder, tucked them beneath her sweater, and quickly closed the boxes as they were. Just as she turned to leave, her foot hit a floor panel that clicked. Another compartment. She crouched and lifted the thin wood slab. Inside, a single cassette tape, labeled E. Fairfax. Audio 7. Final. She didn't wait. She took it. Footsteps approached. Quick but careful. Not heavy like Julian's. She turned and found Marco, the estate's quiet house manager, hovering near the entrance of the room. "I'm not supposed to let you in here, ma'am," he said, softly. That's the problem, Soraya replied, her tone firm but laced with disbelief. You all knew about this. These aren't just documents. These are women. Watched, followed, tracked. Marco's eyes flicked to the folder in her hands. Some of them left. Left? Her voice rose, as in walked out or disappeared. He didn't answer, just looked down. I want Julian. Now. Marco hesitated, then nodded before leaving the room. Soraya's hands trembled as she closed the box and sat on the bench near the wall. The wood underneath her felt colder than the air. What did these women have in common? Were they also desperate? Alone? Sold? Her thoughts were interrupted when Julian stepped in. He didn't look surprised to find her there. I figured you'd find it eventually, he said. Her eyes narrowed. You had files on them. I had protections in place. Protections? She stood, tossing the folder toward him. She had a psych eval, Julian. What were you protecting her from? Herself? Or were you protecting your plan? Julian caught the folder midair, unfazed. Some women were targeted by the wrong bidders. And you're the right one. He stepped closer. You don't know the kind of men that enter those rooms, Soraya. The archive is my proof, not my crime. She backed away from him slightly. You kept tabs on women who were supposed to be for sale? No, Julian corrected. Women who were being hunted, trafficked, coerced, repackaged. And what were you doing? She asked bitterly. Cataloging victims. Or shopping for a wife. He didn't answer that immediately. Instead, he ran a hand over his jaw, the sharp edge of tension rising under his skin. One of those women, E. Fairfax, nearly got taken. She was rescued, but not without damage. She vanished before I could finish securing her exit. You sound like a fixer, not a husband. I never pretended to be a husband, Soraya. She crossed her arms. So what am I then? Just another case file? No, he said, voice lower. You were the accident I didn't want, but the one I couldn't walk away from. The silence between them was louder than before. She turned to the shelves again. Why keep these boxes? He stared at her. Because if I don't, someone else might forget what happened to them. Soraya stared at the initials on the boxes. They weren't just files anymore. They were warnings. And her name wasn't on a box. Yet. But that didn't mean it wouldn't be. Julian's silence in the dimly lit corridor outside the archive wasn't just hesitation. It was fear. Soraya saw it clearly now. Not the typical kind of fear you see in a man, threatened physically. No, this was deeper. It was the kind of fear born from witnessing something unethical, something designed to ruin lives quietly, legally, and without leaving fingerprints. He leaned against the wall, his voice barely above a whisper. There was another bidder that night, he confessed, his gaze distant. One who wasn't there for the thrill, not for the fantasy. Someone else placed a bid on you, and it wasn't Maxwell. Soraya froze, her hand still hovering near the open box labeled E. Fairfax. Her heart thudded painfully. Wait, what? Someone else tried to buy me? Julian nodded. Yes, but the system flagged their account last minute. The bid was high, astronomically so. Higher than Maxwell's final number. Soraya's knees went weak. She had barely come to terms with Maxwell's calculated purchase of her identity. Now there was another shadow lurking in the corners of that auction. Who was it? She demanded. And why didn't you tell me sooner? Julian rubbed his jaw, his throat tightening. Because I didn't know until recently. I only learned about it after digging into the archives myself, just like you. Only difference is I was told to stop looking. By who? He hesitated. Julian, her voice cut through the thick air. Don't you dare protect them. Not now. He looked at her, pain swimming behind his eyes. By Maxwell. He knew. Soraya felt her chest tighten. He knew another bidder tried to buy me and didn't tell me. Julian shook his head. He didn't want to risk pulling you deeper into the mess. But the truth is, he's been tracking this other person ever since. He believes they were behind the sudden system breach night. The override that temporarily hid your profile and caused that delay. It wasn't a glitch. Someone was trying to take you out of circulation altogether and keep you off the books. Soraya sank into the edge of the old wooden desk in the corner, her mind racing. Why would anyone do that? Unless they... She stopped. Julian looked away. Exactly. It wasn't just a bid. It was a targeted acquisition. You were never supposed to be seen. You were marked. The word marked echoed in her skull like a silent bomb. She clutched the edge of the table. And what about E. Fairfax? That name. She was in one of the boxes. Julian nodded. She was one of the early profiles, back when the auction was still invite-only and hidden even from the inner circle. She vanished after her auction night. No trace, no feedback report, no file update. Just gone. Soraya's hands began trembling. So what you're saying is, this mystery bidder has done this before? Julian walked over, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. Not just before. Multiple times. Women carefully selected, archived quietly, and then gone without a ripple. The company never investigates, because they get paid far more than the public bids. Lay off-the-record transactions. Soraya's voice cracked. Like trafficking? Julian didn't answer. He didn't need. Soraya stood abruptly, backing away from the boxes. Why would Maxwell ever allow this? Julian hesitated, because at one point, he didn't know. But once he realized, it was too late. He couldn't shut it down without exposing himself and the company. That's when he decided to buy you himself, to protect you, to stop you from being one of them. But he still didn't tell me the truth, she whispered. Julian's jaw tightened. Because the moment you know the whole truth, Soraya, you're not safe. This bidder doesn't just erase records. They erase people. Her stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But she did none of those things. Instead, she marched back to the open box labeled E. Fairfax and began sifting through it more thoroughly. Inside were letters, handwritten, personal, a few notes that looked like diary entries, some receipts, and a photograph, blurry but telling. A woman with strong cheekbones, brown skin, and wide, fearful eyes, standing beside a man whose face was scratched out. Soraya held it up. Did anyone ever report her missing? No, Julian said softly, because no one knew she was even gone. And you think this same person, this bidder, tried to do that to me? Yes? Do you know who it is? Julian stared at her, long and hard. I have a name, he said finally, but if I say it aloud, we're both in danger. Soraya's voice was firm. Say it anyway. He leaned in, whispering a name so softly, it was almost inaudible, but the syllables landed like lead in her stomach. A name from the industry, not someone she had ever personally met, but one whose reputation rang through the echelons of power and control, like a church bell on fire. Sebastian Lorenz? She repeated, breathless. Julian nodded grimly. He's not just a collector. He's an eraser. A man who sees women as assets to be owned, reshaped, and silenced. He's behind multiple shell companies that operate auctions like these around the world. The difference is, he doesn't follow rules. He creates them. Soraya felt dizzy. So Maxwell outbid Sebastian? Julian paused. Not exactly. Sebastian's system was denied access at the last second. It wasn't that he lost. It was that Maxwell blocked him. That's what started the fire. That's why all this matters. He doesn't forget. And he doesn't forgive. She stepped back, the weight of it all suffocating her. So he's still out there, watching me? Julian swallowed hard. He's been watching. And now that you're in the open, he may try again. For a long while, they both stood there, the weight of what had been uncovered nearly too heavy to carry. Then Soraya turned toward the box again. We need to find out what happened to E. Fairfax. And we need to find proof. Something solid enough to bring this operation down. Julian nodded. And we'll need help. Maxwell won't be enough anymore. Soraya met his eyes. Then let's start preparing. I won't be anyone's silent acquisition. Not now. Not ever. As they locked up the archive room, sealing away the truths for now, Soraya knew the game had changed. It wasn't just about her marriage or her identity anymore. It was about survival. The man who bid on her wasn't done playing. Not yet. Soraya sat curled on the edge of Julian's vast office couch, her knees drawn to her chest, staring at the empty whiskey glass in her hand. The room felt unusually silent, weighed down by the dense truth she had uncovered in that secret archive room. The air had changed ever since she read the labels on those dusty boxes. Target, Soraya. Target, Fairfax. Target, D. Soraya. The room had been a museum of pain. And now she felt like the newest exhibit. Julian leaned against his desk, his eyes not on her, but on the skyline behind her, New Orleans glowing in gold, but beneath it, a city of secrets. He finally broke the silence, his voice low, cautious, as if every word could bruise. He's still looking for you, Julian said. Soraya slowly lifted her head. Who? The second bidder, he said grimly. The man who was at the gala. He's not the type to just vanish after losing. Her blood ran cold. Julian rubbed his temples, then took a breath. His name isn't important now. What matters is that he doesn't play by any rules. You were never supposed to end up with me. The auction was a trap. But for what? I couldn't say until I found that footage. Soraya remembered the twisted smile on the mysterious man's face across the ballroom. He wasn't bidding for love. He was bidding for control, for conquest. And he had lost. Julian looked directly at her now. He wanted you, not because of who you are, but because of what you meant. You're not just a woman to him. You're leverage. Soraya clenched her fists. Leverage for what? Julian hesitated. Your father, Eleanor Fairfax, they're connected. And that man, he holds a vendetta, not just for your bloodline, but for anyone who protects it. You need to understand, Soraya. You were never meant to walk away clean. Her voice cracked. So you married me to protect me? I married you because I knew if he got to you first, you wouldn't survive, Julian said. But I wasn't prepared to care. That admission stunned them both. His eyes dropped. Now I do. The moment sat like thunder between them. Soraya stood, pacing in slow steps, her thoughts a storm. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I didn't know how deep it went until you found that archive, he replied. Those weren't just records. They were part of a broader project, a pattern of psychological breakage. Women selected, studied, then broken. Soraya blinked. Lie prey? Exactly. Julian nodded. The truth sat on her chest like a brick. She hadn't been Betrayal. She had been marked. I should have never gone to that gala, she muttered, voice brittle. Julian moved closer. No, Soraya. You should have never been put in a world that used your beauty as currency. She shook her head, eyes moist. What happens now? He looked torn. You don't leave my sight. Not until we know exactly what his next move is. There are safe houses, a jet on standby. Soraya backed away. You mean to lock me away like some prisoner? No, he said gently. I mean to keep you alive. But the thought of hiding again, of being just another folder in a box, lit something rebellious in her. That night, Soraya lay in their bedroom, while Julian sat on the edge of the bed, watching her from a cautious distance. Though they shared the same mattress, it felt like oceans lay between them. The tension wasn't just about the man hunting her. It was deeper. Was it all manipulation? She asked softly, staring at the ceiling. From the beginning, Julian exhaled slowly. Not at first. I was told to place a bid. That was all. But when I saw you walk down that stage in that emerald gown, looking like every promise life had denied me, I hesitated. And in that hesitation, I defied them. Defied who? She asked. My father. The counsel behind the auction. The syndicate that runs these games. Soraya sat up, eyes wide. There's more of them? There's always more, Julian said, bitterly. Men who believe women are objects, tools. The gala was never about charity. It was a transaction. And you, Soraya, became the most contested item because of who you unknowingly were. Soraya's mind flooded with flashbacks. His tenderness, the gifts, the moments that felt real. Now they all shimmered, like glass, under interrogation. So you used me, too. I protected you, he said, even when I didn't want to admit I was falling for you. Silence stretched between them, each second stinging more than the last. She turned toward him. Then why not tell me about the other bidder the moment I signed that contract? Because I didn't trust myself, he said, standing. And I didn't want to watch you look at me like you are right now. Soraya stood, too. Like what? Like I'm just another man who caged you. She clenched her jaw. Because that's how it feels. Julian looked gutted. Then I failed. The moment shattered when a sharp knock echoed against the door. One of Julian's trusted guards entered. We have movement. A private investigator just landed in Baton Rouge asking about a black-haired woman from New York with ties to Eleanor Fairfax. Soraya froze. He's here? Julian's eyes darkened. Or someone he hired is. Either way, the window is closing. She turned to him with trembling breath. I need to find her. Eleanor. She's the key to all this. Julian shook his head. Too dangerous. But Soraya had already made up her mind. I need answers. I need to know what they want from me, who they think I am. And if you don't like what you find, he asked, then at least I won't be running blind. By dawn, the jet was gone, and so was Soraya. Julian discovered her absence when he reached for her pillow and found only a note, scribbled quickly, but with no ambiguity. I need to find my truth. Please don't follow me until I know who I am to them. To myself. Soraya sat in the back of a lift cab, watching New Orleans disappear behind her as the airport loomed ahead. Her heart pounded like a drum. Every fiber of her being screamed uncertainty, but something else pulsed louder. Resolve. She needed to find Eleanor Fairfax. All roads pointed to New York City, where the trail had gone cold 5 years ago. A woman who had survived the same trap. A name stamped on one of the boxes like an old case file. If anyone knew how to beat the game, it was her. The flight was quiet, turbulence-free, but Soraya's mind was chaos. She traced old messages on her phone, digging for clues, interviews Eleanor had given, philanthropic events she'd appeared at, and a ghost of an address in the Bronx from years ago. When she landed, the city swallowed her in its gray chill. She took no security detail, no designer bags, no trace of Julian's wealth. Just her hoodie, her courage, and the fire in her chest. She moved from subway to street corner, knocking on doors, following whispers. Finally, a retired journalist gave her the break. Eleanor volunteers at an old bookstore in Queens. Doesn't go by that name anymore, but she's there every Wednesday. Soraya waited outside that bookstore for hours, nervous and hopeful. When Eleanor finally stepped out, older, wiser, but unmistakably her, Soraya froze. Eleanor turned, met her eyes, and without a word, nodded toward a side alley. Inside, a private door led to a hidden room above the bookstore. So, Eleanor said, locking the door, you're the newest one. Soraya's voice cracked. They marked me. I saw your name. Eleanor didn't flinch. And now you want to know why? Soraya nodded. I don't know who to trust. Not even the man I married. Eleanor poured 2 cups of tea and sat down. Good. That means you're still alive. Trust is a luxury in our world, Soraya. But knowledge? That's survival. And as the sun set behind the glass windows, 2 women, different generations, same scars, prepared to unravel the deepest secrets of the auction. The men behind it, and the truth about what they were really fighting against. The apartment in Harlem had a heartbeat of its own. Bricks that whispered stories, floors that creaked beneath secrets. Soraya stood in the doorway of Eleanor Fairfax's small but warm home, unsure whether she was seeking comfort, answers, or both. Eleanor, a tall woman with soulful eyes and skin like burnished copper, welcomed her in with a slow, steady grace. Her body moved like someone who'd known trauma, but survived anyway. Strong, but scarred. They sat across from each other, a silence bridging them until Soraya finally said, "I read your name on one of the archive boxes. Fairfax. E. Fairfax. You were there too, weren't you?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her chipped coffee mug. "I was more than there. I was almost gone." Soraya waited, her heart knotted in anticipation. Eleanor's story unraveled like a hushed lullaby, filled with barbed wire. She had been 24, a dancer who trusted the wrong patron. Her name was auctioned off like a luxury item. A private bidder, a man who never showed his face, won her that night. "I was taken, not just bought." "Taken," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "But Julian, he wasn't the one who won me. He was the one who stole me back." Soraya blinked. "Stole you back?" "He infiltrated the system. He outbid the monster who bought me, then faked a transfer, created false paperwork, and gave me a new identity. He played their game, but for the right side, if that even exists in this world." "But why?" Eleanor shrugged lightly. "Maybe he saw too much of himself in me. Maybe he was trying to cleanse something he couldn't fix. Maybe he wanted control, but he didn't touch me, Soraya. Not once. He let me go. He funded this apartment, set me up to live, quietly." Soraya sat back, breath caught between admiration and suspicion. He's a hero now." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "He's not. He's a strategist. One who doesn't always care how the game is played, as long as he doesn't lose." That sentence echoed in Soraya's mind like a warning shot. Julian had saved Eleanor, but not out of love, not out of kindness, out of strategy. But then, what did that mean for her? For everything they'd shared? Eleanor rose from her seat and walked to the dusty bookshelf. Behind it, hidden inside the hollow wall, she pulled out a thin leather folder and handed it to Soraya. Inside were names, pictures, contracts, and invoices. Soraya's stomach twisted. This is a business model. A private network of buyers, most of them hidden behind shell corporations, international aliases, crypto transactions, silent bidders. Julian once told me, the system isn't just corrupted, it's curated. Soraya scanned the documents. One name stood out, not for being flashy, but for how many times it repeated, B. Langston. Eleanor's expression changed, hardening like a wall, locking into place. He's the real power behind this. A collector. A man who doesn't just buy women. He brands them, puts them in cages with chandeliers, and calls it protection. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Soraya asked, rage bubbling up in her throat. Because no one who tried ever survived it. Some vanished. Some reappeared empty. Julian's war with Langston is silent, but it's deep and personal. Soraya closed the folder slowly, as if afraid it would bite. That who tried to outbid Julian the night I was sold? Eleanor didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, some men buy women to possess them, others to rescue them. The scariest ones do both and call it love. The sentence pierced her chest. Julian had said he was protecting her, but protection and possession were just a syllable apart. Soraya rose to her feet, pacing the living room. So where does that leave me? Am I his project? His prize? You're something more dangerous, Eleanor said. You're someone he fell for, which makes you a liability in a world where love gets people killed. The air in the room thickened with a truth Soraya didn't want to swallow. The man she was running from might be the only one capable of shielding her from something far worse. But at what cost? That night, as Soraya lay on Eleanor's worn couch, staring at the cracked ceiling, her mind spiraled into a storm. Julian had lied. Not once, not twice. His entire life was built on lies. But every time she'd needed safety, he was there. Every time she feared someone watching, he already knew. Even now, though she had fled halfway across the country, she had the eerie feeling that Julian knew exactly where she was. Not because he was controlling, but because he was obsessively protective. And that scared her. Eleanor joined her in the dim living room, a blanket wrapped around her like armor. "You're not wrong to question him," Eleanor said gently. "But don't confuse obsession with harm." Soraya turned to her, exhausted. "I don't want to be owned." "Then don't be. But understand, Julian's obsession may be the only thing keeping Langston at bay. You think you're invisible, but you're not. Once you enter the archive, your name never leaves it." The word archive landed like a gunshot. Soraya had seen the boxes. Read the files. Her photo had been in one of them. She was marked, tagged, cataloged like inventory. "I want out," she whispered. "There is no out without leverage," Eleanor said, her voice hollow. "You either belong to someone powerful enough to keep the others away, or you disappear. You're supposed to understand the difference between dangerous and deadlier. Julian may try to possess you, but Langston will annihilate you." That binary suffocated Soraya. To be owned by Julian, to avoid being enslaved by Langston? Where was the justice in that? She closed her eyes, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Her thoughts were a maze. Julian's brutal protection, Langston's faceless threat, her own need for freedom clawing at her chest. "Control isn't love," Eleanor repeated softly. Eleanor nodded. "No, it isn't. But sometimes obsession is the only shield between you and something far worse. And that's the sick part. That's the moral tangle we don't talk about." Soraya turned sharply. "So what now? I go back to Julian and say, 'Thank you for not being as evil as the devil behind door number 2? "No," Eleanor said softly. "You find your truth. You decide if Julian's obsession is something you can confront, mold, or reject. But do it with your eyes wide open." And with that truth lingering in the air like cigarette smoke, Soraya made a decision. She would not run anymore. She would confront Julian one last time. Not to return, not to submit, but to choose for herself. Because real freedom didn't wait to be granted. It was taken back. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the marble hallway like a thunderclap. Julian didn't even flinch. He knew that sound. He knew that rhythm. Only one person ever slammed a door like that, with fury, elegance, and righteous vengeance all at once. Soraya. And when he looked up from the glass of untouched scotch in his hand, there she was, standing in the middle of his penthouse, eyes ablaze, rain clinging to the ends of her pressed curls, lips parted like she'd held in every breath since she left. He stood slowly, not because he feared her, but because he respected her enough to give her the floor. "I didn't knock," she said coldly. "I didn't ask you to," Julian replied, voice low, unreadable. She took a step forward, but she wasn't here to play subtle games. Not anymore. Not after everything. Not after Harlem. Not after Eleanor's truth. "I know everything now," she said. Julian didn't pretend ignorance. "I figured you were." "Eleanor told me what you kept hidden," Soraya continued, walking past the bar, tossing her rain-soaked coat to the floor. "You saved her. You protected her. But you also kept me caged." Julian met her eyes then. "I didn't cage you. I tried to free you from a world that would devour you whole, but you chose for me." She snapped, voice trembling. "You let me believe I was just some prize to be paraded, auctioned, bought. You let me think I had no worth outside of what your signature declared." He moved toward her, but she raised a hand. "Not yet. I came back not for love, Julian. I came back for truth." The words hung heavy. "Then ask me anything," he said. She studied him, this man who once terrified her and seduced her in the same breath, who both bruised and protected. She saw the power in his stance, but she also noticed the slight slump in his shoulders, the regret he never voiced. Soraya stepped closer. "Were you ever going to tell me about the other contract? The second clause?" Julian's jaw tightened. Silence stretched until it shattered. No, why not? Because if you knew what was in it, you'd never come back, and I couldn't bear losing you again. And if I never came back at all, she challenged. He didn't blink. I was prepared to live with that pain, but I wasn't prepared to gamble your life. She stared at him long and hard, the way you stare at a locked door and wonder if there's anything behind it worth saving. Then she whispered, "You hurt me. I know. You humiliated me. No, you made me think I had no voice. Well." And then she said the line that nearly cracked the floor beneath them. "But I still love you. I just hate who you've been." Soraya stood in the heart of Julian's penthouse, thunder rumbling. In the distance, her shadow long and sharp beneath the chandelier. "I'm not here to be pitied," she declared. "I'm not here to be owned. You wanted control. You had it. Now I want power. My way." Julian crossed his arms. "What does that look like?" She pulled a folder from her bag and threw it onto the table. Julian recognized it immediately. The original contract. The terms that made her his wife on paper. The agreement that auctioned her future for his signature. He took a step closer. "Soraya?" "No," she said sharply. "I read every page, every clause. Even the one where you promised to annul everything if I walked away by the 12th month. And you didn't walk away," he murmured. "No," she said, voice firmer. "I ran. And now I'm running back. Not to be your wife, but to reclaim what's mine." Before he could react, she pulled out a gold lighter from her coat pocket, struck the flame, and held it to the edge of the contract. Julian's breath caught. "You don't have to do this." "I have to," she said, eyes never leaving his. "Because this paper said I was bought, but I was never for sale." The flames devoured the edges quickly. Page after page curled into ash. Julian didn't move. He just watched as the terms that once bound them burned away like old lies. When the last corner disintegrated, silence filled the room. "Now we're even," she said. Julian let the silence stretch a beat longer before he spoke. "What do you want now?" "I want the truth," she said. "All of it." Julian nodded slowly. "You want to know why I created the contract?" "No," she said. "I want to know who it was meant to protect me from." That hit like a knife. He turned toward the fireplace, poured another glass, didn't drink it, then turned back. "There's a man," Julian said slowly, "with enough money to buy bloodlines, to erase entire families from the map. He wanted you, long before I ever knew name. He buys women to break them. He once tried to purchase Eleanor. She told him no. He made her pay. I swore no one else I cared about would ever have to." Soraya froze. "And you thought owning me protected me from him?" "I knew that if I made you untouchable, legally mine, he couldn't go near you without starting a war." Her heart raced. "So I was your shield." "No," Julian said, walking closer. "You were my heart. I just didn't know how to say it then." She didn't speak. She just looked down at the ashes, then back up at him. "Thou man, is he still after me?" Julian's voice was low. "Yes, but I'm not the same man either, and neither are you." They stood inches apart now, fire burning behind them, wind lashing the windows as if the world outside knew everything had changed inside. Soraya was shaking, but not from fear. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "Harlem changed me." "You changed me." Julian touched her hand gently. "Then let's rediscover who you are. Together." She pulled away. "Don't say that. Like, it's simple." "It's not." "Then why say it?" "Because it's still true," Julian said. "I've spent my entire life getting what I want. For once, I'm asking instead of taking." He took a breath, one he'd been holding for months. "I want You, Soraya, Julian said, voice cracking ever so slightly. But not because you're mine by contract. Not because I saved you. Not because I protected you. I want you only if you choose me. She looked up, searching his face for lies, but found only sincerity. You'd give it all up, she asked. The empire, the control, the certainty. I already did when you walked away. Soraya's chest rose and fell with the weight of everything unsaid. I don't trust easy anymore, she said. I don't need your trust all at once, Julian replied. Just give me your presence. The rest we'll build. She stepped forward, and this time she didn't stop herself. Their lips met, not in desperation, not in obligation, but in mutual choice. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Then let's start again, she whispered. This time on equal ground. Julian smiled softly. No more contracts. No more power games. Just us. And somewhere deep inside them both, something unspoken healed. Julian didn't sleep. Not after what happened in that room. Not after Soraya burned the contract. And then kissed him not as his wife, but as a woman choosing her man for the first time. He stood on the penthouse balcony, city lights flickering behind him, the scent of rain lingering in the air. His shirt was unbuttoned, his mind restless. The weight of truth had shifted between them, and with it, everything else. Inside, Soraya stared at the ceiling of the guest suite, not because she needed sleep, but because she didn't want to miss the moment she realized it was all real. She had come back for herself, not for him. But now she wasn't sure where herself ended and where they began. Julian had always been intense, but this time, it wasn't power or control that made her heart race. It was vulnerability. The man who once orchestrated everything in shadows now stood in the open, waiting for her. She stepped out of bed, wrapping a silk robe around her. Her feet padded quietly across the cold floor until she reached the balcony door. He didn't hear her until she spoke. Couldn't sleep? Julian turned, eyes meeting hers. Didn't want to. Soraya leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. That's new. He smiled, faintly. You're full of new things these days. So are you, she replied. And it's strange. Julian stepped closer, slowly. Strange, good, or strange, terrifying. Both, she said honestly. Their silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, heavy with every moment they hadn't shared, every word they hadn't said, every night. She spent wondering if she'd been just a piece in his empire, or something more. He gestured toward the chair, across from his. Sit with me? She hesitated, then nodded. They sat in silence, both watching the horizon. Then Soraya whispered, Did you ever regret it? Julian looked at her. Regret what? He asked. Buying me. That night, at the gala, his breath caught. There day since. She blinked. Why? Because I wanted you before the bid. And after I signed that contract, I feared I'd never know if you were with me, because you wanted to be, or because you had to be. Soraya looked away, her throat tightening. I asked myself that too, over and over. Julian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Now I'm not sure what scares me more, loving you for real, or losing you again. Julian's voice dropped. Then let's not run anymore. He reached out, gently brushing a curl from her cheek. She didn't flinch. In fact, she leaned into his touch. And in that moment, the emotional distance between them shrunk into a single heartbeat. I missed this, she said quietly. Not the gifts, not the penthouse. Just this, us, when we were real. Julian took her hand. Then let's be real again. The sun hadn't yet risen when the space between them dissolved. Julian stood, pulling her up gently from her chair. Their hands remained locked, not in possession, but in connection. Their eyes spoke more than mouths ever could. Soraya placed her other hand on his chest, feeling the warmth of him, the steady beat of a man who had faced empires and now stood vulnerable for her. Julian's voice was a whisper. Say it, Soraya, not for me. For you. She looked up, her voice caught between truth and trembling lips. I still want you, she said. Not because I'm yours. Because I choose you. Julian didn't ask for permission. And Soraya didn't wait to give it. Their lips met again. But this time, it wasn't like the kiss in chapter 9. That kiss was a question. This one was an answer. Their mouths moved in sync, slow and searching. Wasn't hunger. It wasn't fire. It was gravity. Like everything that had torn them apart had finally given way to this. Real, raw, unfiltered want. Julian kissed her like a man who had spent years sculpting walls, only to discover that her touch was the wrecking ball he craved. Soraya kissed him back, like a woman who had found her voice not in defiance, but in surrender to her truth. Their kiss deepened, her fingers curling into the back of his neck. His hands settled at her waist, grounding them both. There were no contracts, no threats, no expectations, just them. And when they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, breath mingling in the chilly morning air, Julian whispered, "You could destroy me with this." Soraya smiled. "Good, because you destroyed me first. Let's call it even." He laughed softly, his lips brushing her brow. Then she pulled back and looked at him with clarity in her eyes. "I need more than this kiss," she said. "I need something real." "I'll give you everything I have," he said. "Even the parts I once kept hidden." "And I'll give you me," she said. "Not as your wife, but as the woman you never thought would survive all this." Julian cupped her face again. "You didn't survive, Soraya. You won." Later that morning, the penthouse felt different. Not because of decor or lighting, but because she had changed it. Soraya walked into the kitchen barefoot, hair still messy, wearing his shirt. And when Julian looked up from his coffee, the smile he wore wasn't the smirk of possession. It was pride, admiration. "You look like you own the place," he teased. "I do," she said, stealing his mug. "But not because you gave it to me." Julian leaned on the counter, arms folded. "Tell me what's different." She sipped, then set the mug down. "Me? I'm different. I see that. Last time I stood here, I thought I was on display, like some prize you won in front of the world. Now, I feel like the woman who chooses what her world looks like." Julian stepped closer. "And what does that world look like?" Soraya met his gaze. "A world where I speak and I'm heard, where I love and am loved, without contracts, without power plays, where I don't need to fight for a seat at the table, because I built the table." Julian paused. "Then let's redesign everything." "What do you mean?" "I want you to sit in on every executive meeting. Take my seat if you want. This empire, it's not just mine anymore. It hasn't been since you walked back in." Soraya raised a brow. "You're giving me power?" "I'm sharing it," he said, "because love isn't domination. It's partnership." She stepped toward him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'll take that. And maybe your last croissant, too." He chuckled. "Deal." Then he held her tighter. "I meant it last night. No more hiding. No more shielding. If there's a fight, we fight together. And if there's love," she asked. "We love harder." She pulled back slightly, eyes narrowing playfully. "You realize I'm going to be bossy now, right?" "I already signed up for it," he said. "And honestly, I like it." Soraya laughed. A laugh she hadn't let out in months. Free, unguarded, full. She wasn't the woman from the gala. She wasn't the woman from Harlem. She was the woman who had reclaimed her name, her voice, her seat at the empire, and her heart. And when she kissed him again, it wasn't just passion or desire. It was power, was love. It was hers. The scent of magnolias floated in the air. And for the first time, in a long time, Soraya wasn't running from her past. She was walking straight into her future. 6 months had passed since the kiss that changed everything. Now, Blake and Vale, her fashion boutique that had once crumbled under betrayal and scandal, was reopening on Royal Street in the heart of New Orleans. But it wasn't just a store reopening. It was her, the girl from Harlem, who'd been bought at a gala, now stood as a self-made businesswoman, walking her own red carpet. The courtyard buzzed with press, influencers, and local business owners. Champagne flutes clinked. Cameras flashed. Soraya stood at the entrance in a tailored deep blue jumpsuit. Not flashy, not subtle, just hers. Every detail of the boutique had her fingerprint on it, from the vintage archways to the mural painted above the register. A woman with her arms open, not chained. A woman choosing herself. "Miss Vale," someone called out. She turned, smiling at a young girl, holding her mother's hand. "You inspired me to sketch again. I saw your interview on the local Grit podcast. You said pain can be turned into palette." Soraya crouched down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Ariel," the girl beamed. Soraya handed her a small envelope. "This is for you. A one-on-one design day with me. We'll sketch together." The girl's mom gasped. "You don't know what this means." "I do," Soraya said quietly. "I really you." As the girl hugged her, flash bulbs popped. But for once, the spotlight didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like testimony. Inside the boutique, the shelves held pieces that told stories. Fabrics inspired by resilience, patterns mimicking fractured glass, flowing silhouettes made for women to walk like thunder. Her assistant, Carla, whispered, "CNN is outside. Do you want to make a statement?" Soraya shook her head. "Not yet. This isn't about media. It's about meaning." She stepped back into the courtyard, took the mic, and said, "Blake and Vale isn't just fashion. It's survival stitched with vision. And today, I dedicate this store not to glamour, but to every woman who's ever been silenced, packaged, or priced. We are not for sale. We are the architects of our value." Applause erupted, not just from the crowd, but from the universe that had once tried to crush her spirit. Julian stood beneath the second-floor balcony, watching her. He wore no tie, no announcement badge, no security detail. Just jeans, a soft gray blazer, and eyes that didn't belong to a man used to being second. But that's exactly where he wanted to be. Behind her, not above her. He hadn't spoken during the reopening ceremony, hadn't hovered in interviews. He had helped behind the scenes, investing quietly, restructuring the lease, pulling strings that let her vision shine, without corporate chains attached. She hadn't asked him to, and that's why it mattered. In the private lounge upstairs, Soraya walked in after the event, exhaling like she had just returned from war. Julian rose. "How'd it feel?" "Like breathing again," she replied. He smiled. "You were brilliant." She stepped to the bar cart and poured herself sparkling water. "You stayed quiet today." "I know. Intentionally?" He nodded. "You didn't need me to speak for you." She sat beside him, crossing her legs, one brow raised. "You sure you're okay with that?" Julian leaned back, studying her. "I was raised to believe that power meant control, owning companies, dictating strategy, being the voice in every room. And now," he looked out the window at the street, where she had just stood tall. "Now I realize the real power is loving someone enough to let them rise without needing credit." Soraya softened. "That's the sexiest thing you've ever said," she whispered. Julian laughed, low and warm. "So the ruthless billionaire finally said something sexy." "No," she corrected. "The evolved man did." They clinked glasses. Then he added, "Besides, I already had my moment. This is your season." She leaned against his shoulder. "And in this season, I don't need a knight to rescue me. I just need a man who knows I wear my own armor." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm here for it. Armor, heels, flaws, fire. All of it." She turned to him slowly. "And what if I become more successful than you one day?" Julian grinned. Then I'll be the man cheering loudest in the front row. No tension, no envy, just love that didn't require domination. They sat there in silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was full of trust, admiration, and a new kind of intimacy built on respect. Because when Julian Woolf stopped needing to be the center, Soraya Vale stepped into her own orbit. The world noticed. Night fell gently over the city, casting a soft glow across their shared loft. A restored art space they chose instead of returning to the penthouse. Wasn't lavish, but it was them. Brick walls, wooden floors, uneven paint. Imperfect, but alive. Soraya sat barefoot on the floor, sorting sketches for next season's line. Julian was in the kitchen, slicing strawberries for her late-night craving. You still cut them like a chef, she said, without looking up. He chuckled. You're still obsessed with mid-century design lines. Guilty. They were light tonight. Softer. After months of therapy, long talks, triggered arguments, and rebuilding boundaries, they had found a rhythm. Not perfect, but functional. Julian joined her on the floor, handing her the fruit. She looked at him, serious now. Do you ever get scared we'll fall back into old patterns? He met her eyes. Every day. Me too, she whispered. That's what makes it work now, he said. We're honest about our fear. We don't bury it. Soraya nodded, slowly. Sometimes I still remember how it felt, being powerless. And sometimes, Julian admitted, I still feel guilty. Like I can never fully undo what I did. She touched his face gently. Then don't try to undo it. Just keep doing better. That's enough. He leaned in and kissed her. Not hungrily, not possessively. Just a gentle kiss that said, thank you. They stayed quiet for a moment before Julian added, you know, I read something in one of your old journals. That line. Love isn't the absence of wounds. It's the willingness to keep dressing them. Soraya smiled. I wrote that the week after you left. I never left again, he whispered. No, you didn't. They pulled the blanket over their legs and sat with sketches, strawberries, and music playing softly in the background. She rested her head on his shoulder. We're flawed, he nodded, but faithful. She closed her eyes. We didn't rise from perfection. We rose from ashes, and that, perhaps, was the most beautiful part. Not they kiss, not the empire, not the money, but the love that didn't need to be shiny to be true. Just honest, just mutual, just home. 6 months had passed, but New Orleans still smelled like fresh paint and fried beignet on humid mornings. The boutique was alive again. So was she. Soraya stood by the tall mirror in the new fitting room, fingers grazing over her collarbone, where a faint burn scar remained. One she hadn't covered up. Not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. Every mark, every bruise was a reminder of who she was before, who she fought to become. Julian stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. He watched her with a kind of reverence, never assuming anymore, never rushing her. They had learned that silence was sometimes safer than words and far more honest. You don't wear that necklace anymore, he said quietly, nodding to the empty spot where the diamond-studded collar once sat, the one he'd given her at the wedding auction, the one that had symbolized possession. Soraya turned to him. Because I'm not wearing anyone's claim. Not even yours. She expected a smirk, some cheeky remark, like old Julian might have given, but he just nodded, walking in slowly. I know, he murmured. That's why I haven't tried to place it. She tilted her head. You still keep it? In drawer, he admitted, next to the contract you burned. I never threw either away. They remind me what not to become. That she respected. They both had fire inside them, but fire could burn, or it could forge. And it had taken both to survive each other. Julian, she whispered, stepping closer, do you ever regret it? All of it. He looked at her, eyes softer than she'd ever seen in those early days. Only the part where I thought I could control you and call it love. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still moments. Moments where she flinched when someone grabbed her wrist too fast. Moments when he overcorrected himself into silence. Moments where trust felt like glassware on a narrow shelf. But every morning, Soraya woke up beside a man who no longer treated her like a prize, but a partner. The boutique had become her sanctuary. The fashion line was thriving. And Julian, he had stepped back, not out of guilt, but out of respect. They had dinner together every Friday, without phones. Sunday walks through the Garden District, where he let her rant about buttons, stitching, and bad supplier etiquette. He learned how to listen. She learned how to be heard without raising her voice. They both learned what it meant to choose someone, even after the fires. Soraya leaned over one evening as they curled on the back patio, bowl in his glass, tea in hers, the scent of magnolias brushing the air. I still don't know how to define us, she said. Julian chuckled. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. He reached for her hand. Then call it whatever reminds you that you're free. She swallowed hard. Even if being with you doesn't always feel safe. Julian looked at her, eyes unwavering. Then I'll work until it does. Not because I have to, but because I want to. There was no kiss, no grand gesture, just her head resting on his chest, just his arms wrapping her without clutching, just the sound of two hearts, bruised but beating forward. There had been contracts, lies, half-truths, dressed in designer suits and charm. But there had also been this, a love that had burned everything down before it ever learned how to rebuild. Soraya stood in front of a group of young women at a local center, anonymously, of course. No press, no cameras, just stories. Didn't name names. She didn't share the chaos, but she did share this. Sometimes love begins in the most broken places, but it never thrives in control. A girl raised her hand. But what if someone says they love you and still tries to own you? Soraya smiled gently. Then it's not love. It's fear dressed up as affection. After the session, she walked outside, where Julian waited in the car. Quiet, no pressure, just presence. As they drove through the city, streetlights flickering like soft confessions, Soraya looked over and whispered, "Thank you for not making me choose between healing and you." Julian didn't respond right away. He just reached over and laced their fingers together. You never had to choose, he said. The real me was always going to wait for the real you. She exhaled, because now they both knew. True love isn't about control. It's about trust, choice, and growth. And that was the kind of love they were finally building. Not fast, not perfect, but real. And for the first time, Soraya was no one's target. She was her own.